Hey, going to do a review on the Behringer Model D and look at some of the modes that are available using the A440 button there. I'm going to go quite in depth with some of the Midi functions on this that are available. So stick around. The first thing to say about the Behringer Model D is that it's obviously based on the Moog MiniMoog, with it being a 3-oscillator analog synth. It's interesting to know, however, that when Behringer announced this in, I think it was February or March 2017. They came under an awful lot of fire for it being one of their first clones of another synthesizer. One that was in fact still available on the market, with Moog having released their own version. However, when Roland announced the SEO2 in June 2017, that was seen, and it was released shortly after, that was seen as a tribute or paying homage to, and I think this is where the first levels of kind of synth snobbery came into play. Nobody questioned the SEO2's release. It has two LFOs available if we use VCO3, limited CV connectivity. It does have a 24 decibel per octave self-oscillating ladder filter. There's no pulse width modulation, but you can get around this if you mix the VCO2 saw and the VCO3 ramp. Yeah, you can simulate variable PWM on it. It's interesting to note here that the ramp label on the panel is incorrect. It's not actually a ramp but a saw, and the shark tooth is likewise inverted. So working across, we have the tune function, which tunes all of the oscillators unless the oscillator 3 control is switched off, and that allows for detuning of oscillator 3, VCO3, and also lets us use it as a second LFO. Other than this, the oscillator section is fairly straightforward, which moves across to the mixer section. Again, this gives us the chance to mix all three of these voices in, and also we have external and noise volume controls, giving an option of white noise and pink noise. Now the XDIN is default routed to return the line out for feedback if nothing is connected to it. It really gives it a heavy overdrive, which is typical of MiniMoog and many other kind of 70s synths. This was, it was a well-liked sound. It was a good way to get not just distortion but some real power from the instruments. Moving on to the filter section, there are 4 filter tracking modes, one of them being off, so the filter only responds to whatever it's set to at the time. 1 turned on tracks 1/3, 2 on tracks 2/3, and 1 and 2 both on gives us full tracking. To explain filter tracking, for example, where 1/3 is on, this is that 1/3 level of the filter is affected by the pitch or frequency of the notes played on the MIDI control on the keyboard. Likewise, all the way up, 2/3 of the filter level is affected. 3/3, so it's fully affected and full control. The filter mod on switch sets the filter to be controlled by or modulated by the modulation mix, which is set obviously by the modulation mix knob over here. While we're back over this side, it's worth mentioning that the glider or portamento, it only works on MIDI data, MIDI sequences or keyboard playing coming in through the MIDI. It doesn't work on the volts per octave in. It won't affect the pitch or the way that notes respond there. Interestingly, the oscillators on this were based on the 3046 oscillators for that kind of really traditional Moog sound. If we move over to the filter envelope, which is ADR, we'll run through an explanation of this. The attack, it's the time it takes to sweep up to the frequency set by the amount contour. Decay is the time it takes to return to the original note unless we use sustain to hold the level of the decay in a particular place. Now the amount of contour controls the overall strength of the envelope. The loudness contour is pretty much a VCA envelope. It adjusts the time to reach peak volume, the time to decay back down, and where the volume is held or sustained. The filter and loud decay add release to the sustain for after the key is finished being held, and the control for this is shared by the decay knob, so it kind of moves it from an ADS envelope to an ADS-D envelope. Now there are 5 mod sources available for this, using either the LFO, the noise, the mod source CV, the filter envelope switch for normalization to filter envelope or oscillator 3, and then mix the selected mod sources for further freakiness. If we look on the rear, the main out's a 1/4 inch TRS balanced mono, which the specs actually contradict and say it's a 1/4 inch TS unbalanced. We have high and low switch, now low being 30 decibels below high. The cons for it are that it can go out of tune really easily, and tuning it really involves some pretty hefty synth surgery. Videos for this are available online, and do check them out because it's amazing. Luckily, I check this from time to time, and I've never had a problem with it, which is really fortunate. So the pros for it are the MIDI USB, and the in and through on the front. If you're looking for that classic Moog sound, then you won't be disappointed. Personally, I'm not a huge fan, and I've been comparing this to the SEO2 a lot, which I have also. And this very nearly got sold were it not for the fact that I've just picked up a 960 sequential controller, and I thought that this would look awfully nice in the rack next to it. It is 3 rack mountable oscillators. I mean, it's a complete Model D Euro rack module, which unlike the Moog, it responds to Midi. Anyway, let's take a look at some of that Midi now. With regard to tuning it though, there is the built-in A440 tuning, which is stable and digital. It's the only digital source on this entire thing. It's worth checking out, and it's worth using. To cover the Midi, we can see on the back that it has the typical Behringer Midi dip switches, and here we have a chart showing those corresponding numbers per channel. If we remove the synth from its case, it disconnects those switches and it automatically sets the channel to channel 1. If you've ever seen a video of these things being taken apart, and there is one online, it's well worth watching, you'll see that the case itself is actually a full Eurorack case with captive sliding nuts. Once it's out of its case, we can change the MIDI channel on it still using MIDI utilities and the Synth tool, for example. MIDI utilities allows us to change MIDI settings on this using sysx. There's a list here of the available sysx commands. These allow us to change either the MIDI channel, the key priority, which is note priority mode, multi-triggering options, pitch bend options, and you can see from the list here yourself, this is well worth pausing and screenshotting if you don't have it available. There are several special modes available on the Model D as well, which we can access by pressing the A440 tuning switch. And here you can see by using it on and off, we can turn on or off multi-triggering. We can adjust the note priority for last, low and high, and turn Polychain mode on and off also. Polychaining is quite cool. It allows us to connect several of these units together, or indeed any unit really, although the definition of polychaining doesn't kind of cover that. But it has to be set to the same MIDI channel. And there are other instructions on polychaining here in case we remove it and we don't have MIDI available. With regards to retriggering, one of the criticisms I saw of these units was that it didn't respond particularly as expected or as somebody believed it should. It's possible they were using the wrong triggering style, however, and this has been changed. But here we have the information on the triggering styles and how we can implement those. And here we have information and explanation on multi-triggering, either on or off, where playing a new note it changes not just the pitch, but also re-triggers the filter and loudness control envelopes. Or with multi-triggering off, you can play the pitch, but it doesn't re-trigger any of those envelopes. This page also covers note priority and polychain. Lastly, here are the 2 differences showing the old and new polychain styles, and how the table of responses differs between each one. The note here is that turning on the polychain will affect the note priority function. Unfortunately, the D doesn't respond to any MIDI CC messages, which are much easier to access for most people than using sysx messages. And I think this is one of the only real failings of the D, but I can understand why they've done this. Anyway, I really enjoy the synth, despite not being a huge fan of the noise it makes. and but it's well worth looking at. I mean, if you're after that MiniMoog sound for the price, you know, it's just great. And I'm really looking forward to fitting the rack ears on this later today and putting it into the rack next to the 960 sequential controller. It should be good. Anyway, thanks. If you haven't already, like, comment, subscribe. Any questions at all on this? It was very brief. Please drop them in the comments below, and I promise I'll get back to you. Many thanks.